Um, I just want to say how difficult it is trying to talk to a screen, and it's very tough. And I can totally understand how actors feel when they get a camera thrust into their face. But I think it's a good way of communicating with the world. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit today, and it's going to be really brief. About some things that I feel about art, because I think that's the important thing that I'm trying to express and whatever. So when I started out as a kid writing poetry, it was for a poetry competition, and it was once a year. And you would write a poem, you'd submit it, and you'd have to go up in front of 200 people, 200 other kids, which are actually the harshest audience, and you'd read it, and you might win a prize or whatever. But the question was, were you going to be able to get through it? And it was a little bit of stage fright, but um, that's where it started for me, was writing poems for poetry competitions. And then when I got more into poetry, and just started writing it, I would never read a poem and I would say, oh, this is crap, or oh, it's not very good. I would just write it and move on, and it would act as a kind of therapy to what I was feeling. So then when I came to submit the poetry, and I started to get these form emails back that said, "Oh, it's not very good," or "This is wrong," or "I didn't like that poem." I started to understand about criticism. And the big thing that an artist is always told is you got to be able to handle criticism. And you can see this from people who write novels, who try and publish them, or musicians who record demos, or even filmmakers who send their films to film distributors. You got to handle criticism properly. And in some ways, criticism has been the mechanism of change in my life. And it's been something that has been very negative, but it's something that I suppose I've embraced. Um, the biggest lesson that I have been learning recently is to embrace things that are seen in our world as bad. And bad is a very important word. It starts out when you're a child and somebody tells you you've been bad. And what does that mean? I mean, it means that maybe you've broken a rule, or you've done something that somebody disapproved of. But good and bad are not moral words per se, especially when it comes to criticism. We can talk about people being seen as good or evil, but I don't think that's what good or bad really means. So much of art is entirely subjective, and it's very difficult to say whether something is really good or whether it's not good. Anyway, when I started to write these poems and submit them, and I started to get this feedback about whether something was good or not, it started to change the way I thought about things. And when I got into film, which is pretty much all about good or bad, so much to the point where the director's entire real job is to look at a scene and say what's wrong with it and what's good about it. Um, and then there's a lot of stuff in the editing room where you have to say, well, that take was good and that was bad, and there's all this process of good and bad. And you look at nature and you look at evolution, and you can see that of terms of what is trying to survive and what is good and what is a bad gene, and then trying to make it change it every time. But I guess what evolution shows us is that sometimes it's the freakish mutations of the genes that actually create survival. And I think that in many ways, as an artist, it's a story of survival. Is whether, as an artist, you can go into a very rough industry of people and survive as an artist, financially, but more importantly, psychologically, because that's your currency as an artist. So, um, when I started to get into film, and I started to get this feedback from even on high of what was good and what was bad, it definitely trained my mind to think a certain way and to see things as oh, that's a good light, or that's a bad lighting, or that's a good edit or a bad edit, or that's a good performance or a bad performance. And it got away from this other dichotomy, which is between falsity and truth. And I think that in the world, the worst things in the world are falsity. When we talk about the things that we don't like about other people, or the things that piss us off, We don't say, oh, that they did something bad, or that they're a bad listener or a bad person. We often say stuff that they lied to us, or they weren't fully truthful about something, or they led us on, or they were fake, or they were two-faced. This, I think, is more interesting than saying whether art is good or bad. We can only say whether it is true to us. And by that token, we can only have a subjective point of view of art rather than something that is more universal. And therefore, we can speak for our own experience. Because somebody who lived in ancient Egyptian culture is going to have a different definition of truth to somebody that lives now. Simply because civilizations change and they have different parameters of what is a common day-to-day life or experience or their belief system. So I think truth is the actual pursuit of art. I don't think it's whether it's good art or bad art. It's whether it's truthful art. If you look at some of the paintings that were painted, hundreds of years ago, they wouldn't be popular now because they're not in vogue, because people see them as bad, because people see them as a representation of the old. They're not good enough. Or if you look at some of the films that get made, probably 10,000 per year, and a lot of them are just thrown away because they're seen as bad. Well, I think that's wrong. I think that all art is good for the world. I mean, when you look at the people that tear down the natural resort, rainforests in the Amazon, I mean, that is bad for the world. But putting art into the world, whether it's film or poetry or music, there's nothing bad about that, as long as it's something that has some degree of truth to it. And truth does not have to be reality. It could just be something that we relate to, something that has a theme that we can experience in our own life. Because so much of life is beyond the world of the real into the world of dreams and the unconscious. So to me, a lot of my career was put in jeopardy because of, or my life as an artist put in jeopardy because of criticism, because people looked at what I did and I looked at what I did and said, well, that wasn't good and that was bad. And as a director, I worked up and told that to people, and people read my poetry or my writing and said, that's not good. And the people that distribute do this, and that's what their job is to tell people whether something is good or not. But really, the factors that they're looking at are not necessarily factors about aesthetics or something universal. It's more specific to what their model of distribution or releases really are, and they're under their own pressures. So I think that to reframe art or cinema as art, you have to start to reframe the idea of what is good and what is bad, and you have to stop using that terminology and stop imposing that terminology on art. You have to be more about finding truth. People that go and seek fossils and are archaeologists, and they're sort of, I see myself as an archaeologist of digging into sort of like human emotion and the soul and things like that and the heart. Those people aren't looking for things that are good or bad. They're not even looking for things that are present anymore. They're looking for things that are deep and things that are hidden and things that hold secrets and things that have been important in the world. So I think that to look at it more less as a choice of art, as a dichotomy of light and dark, good and evil, good and bad, to look at it more as excavating what is already there, looking for this glimmers of truth, these fossils of truth, is a much more suitable way of creating inspiring art. I know that if I'd started writing and the people that had been my teachers had always told me, oh, it's not good enough, that's not good enough, I wouldn't have kept doing it. So if what our world is supposed to be is creating a better world and creating something for more generations to come, we have to inspire them by creating art that allows them to feel like they can create too. Because we're all creators. And I've heard people say stuff like, oh, just, because you have your microphone doesn't mean you have anything to say, and I think that's not true. I think everyone has a story and everyone has a life, and a life is really precious. And it makes me angry and upset to think that there is a culture out there that spends their entire professional lives criticizing people. And I'm not directing this at film critics because I think that that's um, an art form within itself, because that's what this film industry wants to have. I'm not saying I agree with it, it's what they want to have, but there are people that look at art who have no place to criticize, who have no knowledge to criticize, and they criticize, and they don't create their own art. And that's fine, and everyone is free to do what they want, but I think it just destroys the inspiration to make art. So my future is not going to be about criticizing people. It's not going to be about saying to people what's right and what's wrong, because I've learned that um, the real beauty in the world is hidden, and it's hidden because we don't know where to look for it, and we don't know where to look for it because we are judgmental, because we are imposing our own judgments upon the world more often than not. And to find this kind of beauty, this imperfection, this kind of like truth is very difficult. But the way you have to look for it is to be an archaeologist. And you have to look into culture, and you have to look into real life. You have to look into the tiny details. Like, um, I was looking on the floor a couple weeks ago, and I saw a spider. It was just walking really slowly. And I looked down, and I could see every single leg uh, of the spider going really slow, and just like a dance, like lifting it up and then putting it back down. And it was like ballet. And it was a ballerina. And it's those tiny details of truth, of nature, that is present in nature, that is real and authentic in the natural world, that I think has to be looked for and discovered. So I think that more people have to embrace the idea of not seeing art as good or bad, but seeing art as true or false. And I think that that's much more of a better way to approach art than it has been previously.